Tonight we open our lesson with chapter 5 of Your Erroneous Zones. And that chapter is entitled Breaking the Barrier of Convention. Convention. And my dictionary defines convention as general agreement or acceptance of certain practices or attitudes. At every stage of man's unfolding, there is a tendency, and a natural one, and in a certain very real sense, a very good tendency for man to adopt generally certain practices and attitudes that are fitting for where he is at that time and place. When we were children, we had certain practices and attitudes that were considered to be childish, and they were all right because we were childish. But it was understood that when we grew up that we would not act like a child. Paul said that, and when I became a mature person, I put away childish things. But you see, the problem is that we grow up, but we don't put away childish things. The practices, the experiences, the responses, the learned and acquired responses that we had when we were children, in a very strange way we carry forward with us and frequently find ourselves in our 20s and 30s and 40s acting out the role of a child. And when you do, that is an erroneous zone of activity. Remember, it just occurred to me, when Moses was sent down into Egypt to set his people free. The Pharaoh, remember the Pharaoh, the villain that had them in captivity and wouldn't let them go? Well, the Pharaoh represents that limiting consciousness that dominates, that lower self that has taken charge and will not let you go, that lower self that keeps you encapsulated in fear, captivity, worry, apprehension, separated from your good. The Pharaoh wasn't just an Egyptian. The Pharaoh is a kind of consciousness that each one of us has been through and still experiences. And Moses is our liberator. Moses is the early unfolding Christ consciousness that is going to set us free from the limitation of convention, of captivity. And so, as you know, the Israelites were set free. They went out into the wilderness for a period of time. 40 years, the period of time necessary to complete the process of their growing up, so that they would grow up. And in that experience as a nomadic tribe in a desert, arid climate, it became necessary for them to adopt certain practices and attitudes that were absolutely important for them where they were at that time. And that was necessary and good. But then guess what happened? Those practices and those attitudes came to be considered as the law of God, and for generations thereafter, the Israelites, as they were no longer in the wilderness, the desert, when they became city dwellers, were forced to follow the procedures and practices of an ancient culture that they no longer experienced. And they could not break out the convention. I think that principle is best described by someone that you some time ago came to love, to know, to appreciate. Your friend Jonathan Livingston Seagull. Remember Jonathan? And Jonathan, and the reason you love Jonathan, incidentally, is because you are Jonathan. Jonathan was not that bird. You are that bird, Jonathan. And Jonathan discovered that Jonathan was more than a seagull, that his life was more than just something to be subscribed to fighting and scrabbling over fish heads. And that the conventions, the attitudes of the flock, the accepted attitudes the things that the flock did regularly among themselves, even the way they flew, was not necessary. And as Jonathan discovered that he was more than a seagull and made the demonstration, remember how he learned to fly higher and farther and faster than any other gull had ever learned, because he broke out of the old attitudes and conventional concepts of a seagull. What seagull ever really believed that he could fly the way Jonathan flew? And what seagull ever learned how to reshape his wings to achieve certain attitudes of flight? Jonathan did. And he was absolutely certain that as he developed a new awareness, that the flock would just welcome him. They would marvel at his achievements, and that they would instantly recognize that they were like he was, because he knew that he was no different from any member of the flock, except that he had acquired a different attitude. He had stripped himself of the limitations of the past. And so when he really was moving with it, and the flock was gathered one bright morning on the beach, here came Jonathan at about 180 miles an hour, doing a double loop before the leaders of the flock, and then he landed with a big grin on his face, because he knew how overjoyed they would be with their discovery. And guess what they did? You know what they did? He immediately was an outcast, and the elder said, for his reckless irresponsibility, violating the dignity and tradition of the gull family. In other words, for daring to be different. For daring to be different. For daring to become what he already was, Jonathan was outcast. And he couldn't understand it for a little while. And then he understood it. Well, you and I must learn to dare to be different, and this means breaking the barrier of convention. And Dyer said in the opening, there are no rules or laws or traditions that apply universally. Nothing is absolute. And I agree that in the three-dimensional world, in that world of man-made rules and laws, the general agreement or acceptance of certain practices and attitudes, they are made to be transcended as we move forward from our childishness. As we become increasingly more sophisticated, we grow out of the past and form and reshape ourselves into new practices and attitudes that are right for that moment, becoming willing to even change them instantly as we go along. Nothing is to be permanent except our ultimate spiritual identity. Now, nowhere is it being inferred by what I say, or what Dyer wrote, that you and I must become contemptuous of the law or break rules simply because you see fit to. This is not that license that the little self has given itself to indiscriminately break out windows and laws and to be outspoken or contemptuous just for the sake of it. No, no. But blind adherence to convention. You see, convention is not a law. It's something else entirely. Something, in fact, that may be far more destructive to the individual than the violation of certain rules. Some of the rules that have been established are really foolish, and traditions that no longer make any sense need to be escaped from, because we're moving forward into a larger identity that cannot be contained within the conventions or the rules of the past. What I'm really speaking of, and what Dyer is referring to, is an inner attitude, the willingness to break out of our external focus of control. Almost all men and women upon the earth living in the natural condition of our human personality are controlled most of the time by things outside themselves and people outside themselves. They've been told where to go and how to think when they get there. A type of universal, ethnic, racial, intellectual conformity. Sometimes almost for the sake of that conformity. And in a very real sense, it stifles our true identity that is seeking to experience itself. Well, are you willing to become a person who places your point of motivation internally, looking for an internal motivation and internal control? As long as we're controlled by outer things, we will always ultimately end up frustrated, fearful, and dependent upon the world around us. We'll always be looking to see, what do they think? And what should I do to keep them from thinking what they're going to think anyhow? And you'll never learn to fly. You'll never get off the ground reacting to life in that situation. And a person who is motivated by outer things, these are some of the things that that person would say if you ask the question, why do you feel bad? He or she would say, well, my parents mistreat me, or he hurt my feelings, or my friends don't like me anymore. And then there's that real good one, my luck is down. Things aren't just going well, always out of control. But conversely, if you ask another person who was feeling very, very well that day, why they were feeling well, and she said, well, because my friends are treating me very nicely, or my luck has changed, or no one is bugging me, then is that not still a person who is only feeling up because things are going well for the moment? And look out, because the crash will come. Before dark, I will guarantee you the crash will come. Something will happen between now and the time the sun sets or rises, whichever the case might be, for that down movement in consciousness. But the internal focus of control requires that we put the responsibility for how we feel and how we act squarely on our own shoulders. And if a person is not feeling too well, then they respond by saying, well, I've been telling myself the wrong things. I've been letting my mind wander away from the truth about my life. I really haven't been working on myself. I've fallen back into my old attitudes, and I know it, and I'm going to do something about it right now. You never, ever blame conditions or persons or situations. You know instantly what the problem is, and the problem is always you, that you haven't set your wings just right and you went crashing into the sea. But you're not going to stay there. Jonathan never does. You're going to get up bruised and broken perhaps, and you're going to fly away and try again. Well, it makes life exciting, because with this attitude, you never are controlled by a person, place, or situation. Your destiny is always within range of your adjustment. You can make the adjustments within yourself and immediately begin to experience the climb back up into the sky. You never have to stay down. You never have to stay depressed. As a matter of fact, depressions become unacceptable behavior from our emotional self. You can never find fulfillment if you persist in permitting yourself to be controlled by external forces. And if you believe that convention, the conventional way of doing it, is the right way. Coming to church on Sunday morning, I found myself stopped at 4:30 in the morning at a traffic light on Hayes. And the light was red, and I was sitting there. And there was not a car in sight, in either direction, not a car in sight, and I was waiting for the light to change. And I almost fell over laughing, and as I drove through the red light, why should I wait for a light to change at 4:30 in the morning? What should happen to you soon? And when you drive through it, you look down the street to see if they're going to get you. Now, am I suggesting that we leave here and run all the red lights on the way? Of course not. Of course not. If the traffic lights broke down in the city, we'd have a real problem, and you and I know it. You wouldn't be able to move. And so they're necessary under most conditions. But as you grow and change, and at 4:30 in the morning, don't sit there in a red light when there's not a car in sight. And you probably have a lot of other red lights that you're parked in front of for longer than 60 seconds, I'll guarantee you, waiting for someone's permission that you will never get. Did you know that you probably are waiting for someone's permission to live your life? Yesterday, in Ann Lander's column, and I love the way she tells us how to live our life. She's just right on most of the time. And there was a 36-year-old virgin who had written in because she did not like being a virgin anymore. And she was waiting for the light to change. Well, you know what Ann Landers told her to do. And she said, I would not give this advice to a 17 or 18-year-old girl because there are different things happening. You're at different places in your experience. Can you see that in certain times we have to break out of the past and move forward into our new experience? And we fall into that right and wrong trap. Certain things are right and certain things are wrong, and they're right because Aunt Mary said they were, and she told my mother, who told me. Do you know what right and wrong is? Right is something that works, and works, and works, and works, consistently. And wrong is something that doesn't work, it doesn't work, it never did work, it never is going to work. And if your life is not going in the way that you want it to, it's because you've been doing some wrong things, believing them to be right. They are erroneous zones. But if you cannot catch yourself doing and not doing, can you see how that all of the red lights that have stopped you from going and from moving in any direction? You see, it's possible to get so backed up, so encapsulated, that you can't move anywhere, forward or backward or sideways, because the lights won't change. But you're a spiritual being with the ability to analyze and to examine and to begin to decide and to evaluate and to take some chances of breaking out of old concepts, usually imposed from without, from former times. Now, obviously, you do not hear me indicating that we're supposed to have the freedom to practice robbing banks and other impractical and immoral things. But you are supposed to have the mature freedom to go out and live your life in a way that is meaningful and good and lovely and beautiful and exciting, not only for yourself, but for all of the people that you know. You have the right to live your life in an open fashion, visible and high. A high profile, moving forward into new experiences. I thought I would like to share with you from the column Tune In Tomorrow, a synopsis of last week's soap opera happenings. They would perhaps give you a little more insight into the nature of the lesson this evening. And if you've been busy this week, you've not kept up with All My Children. And you did not know that Phoebe blew her cool after being arrested for drunk and unlicensed driving. She told reporters that Charles' affair with Monica was responsible. Nick dated Ellen and Claudette while Erica did a slow burn. David accepted Dottie as his child, and Christina saved her during an epilepsy attack. Edna refused to give David and Christina custody. Phoebe fired Benny after he refused to purge himself in court, and he's attracted to Claudette too. Jeff warned David to keep Christina out of his affairs with Edna. Well, just a little part of life. Did you keep up with Another World? Olive raised Cain after learning that John named his children his insurance beneficiaries, leaving her up the creek. Evan plotted with Claude, a sleazy detective, to set up John and Olive. Cliff fumed that Regina will be working with Mac because of Sven's schemes. I'm not going to read this next line. I just am not. Days of our lives. Mike confessed his love to Trish after she gave birth to a baby boy, whom I would say it's better late than never, wouldn't you? Phyllis returned and gave Neil more hard times. He got drunk and was rebuffed by Betty. Doug's new cafe opened. It wasn't a complete success. Laura was sidetracked from encountering the real Marlena, and on and on. Do you see some Erroneous zones? Did you see any of yourself? The ridiculous little boxed-in concepts and attitudes that keep us from experiencing our lives, keep us locked in, keep us always convinced that someone else is doing it to us. Our happiness is coming because we are not understood by them, and because they will not give us permission, and because the light won't change. Can you see that? Dyer said that he once asked a client if he had trouble making a decision. And the client said, well, yes and no. Have you had any trouble with decision making lately? Even with small things? This is a direct outgrowth of the inclination to divide things into right and wrong categories. And the indecision comes from wanting to be right, from being afraid to be wrong because of what will they think, of being afraid to drive through a red light at 4:30 in the morning when no one is in sight. What will they think? It doesn't make any difference. They're going to think it anyhow. If they don't think it because you do that, they'll think it because you do something else. And besides, if you don't do anything with your life, they will say, she can't make a decision to do anything with her life. That's what they will think. What they think is not important, but what you think and what you are doing, what you see happening to you, and what is not happening to you is ultimately the most important part of your experience. If life is not happening to you, it's only because you are holding it back with hand outstretched and refusing to let it come forward and to express itself. You don't have to make life happen, but you must let it happen by giving yourself permission to experience life. And life cannot be contained into that set of rules and regulations that we have called convention, the conventional way. You are more than that dimension. You are really of the fourth dimension, a spiritual being. You can never be contained in the experience of the race. You and I must go ahead and be leaders of a new dimension of men and women who are willing to demonstrate a larger identity and the consequent experience that follows that larger identity. But we cannot do it until we're willing to break out of the folly of shoulds and musts and ought tos. Dyer wrote that there's a neat little word coined by Albert Ellis for the tendency to incorporate shoulds into your life. And he said it's called masturbation. You're masturbating whenever you find yourself behaving in ways that you feel you must, even though you prefer some other form of behavior. I must do that because they have said I must. Or I should not do that. It's just a different kind of masturbating, when there is no logical reason why you cannot take that option at this time in your life. Did you know that there are many people seated here tonight who are afraid to succeed? Did you know that? And something inside them is saying, I must fail. Well, that's an erroneous zone. You must not fail. Ultimately, you must not fail because you were built for success. You were built to supersede the standard behavior of the race, to supersede the standard or normal experience of the race. You were built to experience beyond the emotional requirements of the average person. You were built to live from a super joy, a super excitement, and a super expectancy all of the time. And you have the right to determine how you're going to feel every moment of your life, regardless of the conditions that exist for you. Would you like to know some typical should behaviors of people? Well, one of them, the dominant one, is shifting blame for your actions to another person. Have you ever got caught doing something and immediately you began to defend yourself by putting the blame on another person? Or did you ever get an invitation to a wedding, someone you didn't even know, but you must go to the wedding or at least send a gift? Who said you must? I'll tell you who said you must. The person that sent the invitation, that's who said you must. Have you ever found yourself attending religious services which you dislike and don't believe in, but you go because it's expected of you and you want to do the right thing? With all the earnestness at my command, I beg of any person here who is in the least bit uncomfortable at this place to get up and leave right now. You'll do yourself a great service. You must not stay here if you don't like it here. And if you are not brave enough to leave, don't come back. Why? Because you must break out of that role of forcing yourself to do what you must do and begin to do what your soul requires, a different thing. If you have a hunger to grow spiritually, and this is the place, then come, but come so that that hunger can be experienced. And if this is not the place, then go where you can find it. And you must go where you can find it, not where convention tells you that you will find it. Your heart will lead you there if you break out of your musts. There's a self in you that will take you where you need to go. Keeping mattress tags on for years because they say do not remove under penalty of law. And what about those little tags on the back of your blouses that stick up and out? Last Sunday I was punching one down and I wanted to take my scissors and nip it off. But the person who owned it might think, well, I must not cut it off because they put it there. Well, if it sticks out, I must cut it off. Do you see? Always having Sunday dinner at Mama's. You'd rather not. But they'll be upset, won't they? Well, they are upset anyhow most of the time. So when reading a book, always starting at page 1 and reading every word to the end, even if you really don't like the book. Or having read half of the book, you have to finish it because you've already read half of the book. Women never asking men for dates. Who said you can't? Now, obviously, I would be somewhat discreet. But who said you can't look around? You're already looking around. And other people who are not going to the Christmas party because they don't have an escort. Who said you had to have an escort to go to the Christmas party or anywhere else? You don't. You don't. All you have to have is the joy of your own life. That's all you have to have. And let it take you where your heart is, where your joy is, that place of unfolding. And stop letting those red lights keep you from moving forward into your new experience. It requires risks. Breaking out. It may have seemed to you that most of the erroneous zones or the conventions that we have acquired, I've implied that they've come from our parents or from our past. Frequently they come from our present, from our peer group. Some of the worst things we learned and set up as standards to live by came from our peers. And the present crop of young people are probably even worse at it than we were. I'll give you this example. I've recently talked to two young ladies, and they are ladies, who are living with young men. Now, I'm not talking about the condition of living with, but this has become more and more of an experience in the young generation, as you know. A generation ago, it was unacceptable. Now, suppose that this becomes a conventional thing to a person, and someone does it because they're supposed to do it. But inside themselves, they really can't stand it. They really know that they're getting together with that other person out of weakness, not out of strength. Okay? It can be a very damaging situation. Now, if it is, break out of it. Break out of it. Have the ability to look at this situation and say, well, I don't have to live this way, although this is a present norm. This is something that is supposed to be better than marriage because it doesn't lock you in. But this has me locked in worse than that bad marriage that I just got out of did. Okay? If your freedom is not your freedom but becomes your prison, get out of it. It makes no difference what it is. Break out of the imprisonment that is imposed from without. If you're happy there, then stay and grow. But if not, let your heart take you where you need to go. Keep an internal, external journal. Write down your external references. Begin to observe what controls you, what turns you on or turns you off. Where are you coming from? What's stopping you from moving forward? Keep a journal for this next week, for this next month, and you'll be absolutely amazed at what you'll find out about yourself. This morning, I received a letter from a person who's making such marvelous, such beautiful progress that it is a delight to me to behold her. And she said, why do I feel so disconnected? Why do I feel so disconnected? Well, when you and I are in this process of changing from external orientation to internal focus, there's a season of being disconnected. You really don't know where you are some of the time because you are turning away from outer things and persons and relationships that have caused you and attitudes that have caused you to be motivated, and you're going within yourself finding that internal focus of motivation. And so for a time you are not connected, and that's all right. That can be one of the most beautiful periods of your spiritual growth. It's fantastic freedom that is there. And then she went on to write, my good does not come from or from any outside influence. My good comes from God. I deserve it. I'm entitled to it. It's God's wish and God's desire that I accept my good. I give my permission to accept loving, positive, beautiful ideas and attitudes and emotions. I no longer accept unacceptable behavior and attitudes from myself. I do accept myself as the loveful, confident, trusting person, beautiful, intelligent, and wise, knowing that I am meant to experience only good from life. I am uninhibited. I am free. I am a friend of life. I am God's open channel. I make decisions knowing that I am in tune with the universe. I accept prosperity, I accept my divinity, and I claim the magnificent highs of life as my own, and I share them with everyone who will let me. Goodbye, negative emotions. Wow. I love that. And Emerson, in his essay, The Oversoul, on page 200 wrote, the nature of these revelations is always the same. They are perceptions of the absolute law. They are solutions of the soul's own questions. They do not answer the questions which the understanding asks. The soul answers never by words, but by the thing itself that is inquired after. As you and I break out of the conventions and out of our low-vaulted past, we begin to move into an experience of a fantastic unfolding that Emerson wrote again. Men grind and grind in the mill of a truism, and nothing comes out but what was put in. But the moment they desert the tradition for a spontaneous thought, then poetry, wit, hope, virtue, learning, anecdote all flock to their aid. And when you and I can break free, that's what happens. Your life becomes a poem, and there is laughter, joy, and virtue, the goodness that is in you. You do not need to be afraid to release your soul, because you are by definition a virtuous person. And learning and knowing will be your experience all the days of your life. The second chapter, and we will not have too long to dwell upon it, is called The Justice Trap. Before I say anything about it, let me ask you, do you want justice? I don't. I can tell you to this very hour, justice would do me in. There is a larger something that I need, and it's called mercy. Mercy. Justice means due reward or treatment. In the Lord's Prayer, there's a line that says, forgive us our debts, our trespasses, as we forgive others. And in that statement is the law of the mind that cannot be broken. You see, the law that we establish for others is the one that thereby becomes established for us in the universe. And if you require justice, a kind of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, and your share exactly divided right down the middle. Remember when you were a kid and they were cutting that Milky Way in the middle, and you stood there and made sure where the knife was? And if it slipped over your way, that was all right, but if it went the other way, that's justice. No. Mercy is kind or compassionate treatment to an offender or other person under one's power. A disposition to be kind and forgiving and generous. Did you know that nowhere on this earth is justice to be found at the human level? Not the kind of justice that man is looking for, and we're always talking about justice. Dyer said that earthworms don't get justice. Robins eat them. And to an earthworm, that's not justice at all. But cats eat robins. There's nothing fair about that if you're a robin. And if you look at life anywhere from your human condition, there's something eating you. There's something that is not fair. And you can find, if you will look for it, very quickly, the unfairness of life. It is there for you to see, and I'll bet you've seen a lot of it. You've seen what they've been doing to you. and you remembered it, and dwelt upon it, and told about it, and with a voice that rose higher and higher as you told about the injustice of your life. You bet. It isn't fair. Well, it is. It's tough and it's fair. Life is tough, and it is for our growth. We are here to grow up and out of the ordinary system of thinking and the ordinary system of justice into a larger system that is called mercy. You know, our culture promises justice. Politicians are always referring to it in their campaign speeches. Labor demands it. All of the races demand their particular kind of justice. All ethnic groups want justice like the others have had. And each of the political parties and any others that will be invented along the way want their own particular kind. And the legal system promises justice, and the people demand it, but no one ever delivers it because it is not to be found at that level. Well, you can't keep a tally sheet online saying, if I act this way, if I love you, then you have to love me back. And what you do for me is what I'm going to do back for you. That's justice. It's a kind of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And my actions equal your actions, but if your actions don't equal mine, that's not fair. It's not fair. Can you see any unfairness that's been happening to you? Did you know that jealousy is a demand for justice? Jealousy is really a demand that someone love you in a certain way, and you saying it isn't fair when they don't. And it always comes from a lack of self-confidence. Jealousy always comes from erroneous zones, very grave, pronounced erroneous zones inside yourself. And it's always an outer-directed, an other-directed activity, a deep sense of insecurity. In reality, as you and I begin to love, we give others the right to love in the way that is natural for them. And if you and I love each other dearly, it is our desire that each other love everyone else as dearly as we love each other. It is no threat to us to share the love that we have. The more I love all of you, the more I can love one of you. Do you understand that? And so there's no jealousy. Jealousy is an erroneous zone that cuts off the free flow of the positive electricity and energy that will produce mercy, a kind and generous activity of the Spirit that says, you cannot threaten me. Love me and love all my friends. Love the world. And I can trust you in that love. I do trust you. The more you love, the more virtuous you are, the more honorable you are, and the more of you I have not to possess, but to experience. Wow. And I would experience all of you, but I cannot experience any of you if I confine you into the smallness of my own irrational demands. Well, you're a spiritual being. This week, go out and give mercy to the world. And you will receive something better than justice. And don't let any red lights stop you. And so it is.
This concludes the lesson on Side A. Now, please fast forward to the end and turn the cassette over for the continuation of Freedom from Your Erroneous Zones.